Welcome back. Aftermath of the Ravens' loss to the San Diego, Los Angeles, Carson Chargers of Inglewood. We're piecing it all together, and certainly no one has done a better job of piecing it together than Jenny Vrentas. I retweeted her after hugging her and fist-bumping Peter King in the press box and hoping and wishing and hoping and wishing, and instead, she is going to Foxborough this week to continue her coverage for the MMQB and Sports Illustrated. You can follow her out on Twitter at Jenny Vrentas. That's Vrentas, and I also retweeted her piece. Well, Jenny, while we were all in the Ravens locker room seeking out, Joe Flacco and Marty Morningwig and Lamar Jackson to ask, well, what happened? You were in the Chargers locker room and figuring out exactly what happened there, and I think all of us in the aftermath realized they had a pretty good defensive game plan to stop Lamar, and seeing him 2 weeks ago turned out to be to their benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they really drew off of what happened in that first matchup between the teams. I think the Chargers felt like embarrassed that they had gotten bullied, by the Ravens in the first meeting, and just the way that they controlled the clock and kept running the ball and draining time off. That from the first meeting, the Chargers were determined to change that. So they decided this time to go with a defensive game plan that included a base defense with 7 defensive backs, which is just unheard of for a base defense. Teams might go to that package at times during the game, but they use that for all but one defensive snap. Part of the reason was personnel. They've had a ton of injuries at linebacker this year, so they sort of had to put safeties at linebacker. But really, they wanted to put more speed on the field, and the idea was they wanted players who could run sideline to sideline because of Lamar Jackson's speed on the ground, but then also if they got fooled and, there was a pass play when they thought it was a run, they could, help in coverage. So they basically packed 7 DBs. It was their quarters package. And then really they went with four guys up front for the most part, and then really played a lot of those DBs in the box around that. So they basically kind of had, defensive linemen were up front, trusted to sort of win their assignments and stay in their gaps. And then behind that, they had all of these fast guys spread around the field.
Jenny Vrentas joining us here from the MMQB and discussing game plans here. This really is the weirdest part of this kind of matchup. 2 weeks apart, the Ravens had a lot at stake to go out there. You used the word bullied. That's an interesting thing to say when you go 3,000 miles and beat another team and take the clock away. But the Ravens did not have a big advantage in that game. They did not get into the end zone as much as they would have liked in that game and needed their defense in the end. Vegas loved everything about the Chargers coming on the road, and I've been doing this a long time, right? So for 30 years, anytime the Chargers would play January games at 10 o'clock in the morning, no matter whether the quarterback was Fouts or Humphreys or Rivers, you never sort of liked that team, but traditionally you never like the younger quarterback in January, no matter where they're playing, and certainly the younger person with no experience. Lamar Jackson played that part, and I don't know that we should all be shocked that the ball got kicked around, that a different defense showed him some things that he hadn't seen before, that they had seen 2 weeks ago, and that they were embarrassed by. It really did look like the Chargers came to take their lunch money on Sunday, and I think for all of us to look at it and say, well, it wasn't like you lost on a tipped field goal or something like the Eagles and the Bears the other night. I mean, it was a pretty thorough statement, I think, by the Chargers that they were the better team most of the year, and they had a plan, and their plan worked.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the Chargers defense dominated the Ravens offense for 3.5 quarters. Now, credit to Lamar Jackson for rallying the Ravens toward the end and really making things interesting, right? Where the Chargers needed one final big defensive play to make sure that they came up with the win. But yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting, right? Because, that game in December, the score felt like the Ravens should have been up by more, but yet they weren't, and the Chargers were still in it. But yeah, just that idea of them kind of controlling the ball and controlling the clock and limiting the Chargers opportunities, and really the Chargers couldn't get them off the field the first time. I think what was interesting is this was, the first defense that has seen this Ravens offense with Lamar Jackson, which reminded them of sort of this, the option principles and run heavy, which is so different from what anyone else in the NFL is doing. But because they saw it twice, they really were able to home in on tendencies. And among those tendencies were some of the escape routes that Lamar Jackson has when, he can't find somewhere to throw. Where will he escape and try to use his legs? And, the players noticed that he likes to escape to his left. So they saw that if he wasn't seeing something downfield to pass, they knew to look for him to go to his left. And you saw that on the first series. There was a third down play, and they sort of helped get him off the field by there were defenders that were kind of drifting left with him. And there were some other plays in the game that Chargers defensive players said that they knew certain formations, they knew where the ball was going, and they knew what the play might be. So I think that is something the Ravens offense caught so many people off guard this season, right? And they were doing things that teams hadn't had practice defending. But when a team sees you twice, they know a little bit more what's coming. And clearly the tendencies and the tells that the Ravens had on offense, that's something that they need to work on fixing next season and make it so that teams that do see them twice and have had an off-season to study won't have such an easy time diagnosing plays.
We talk so much about head coaches this time of year and where John Harbaugh is going to wind up and whether the Ravens are going to ink him long-term and who's going to wind up in all these seats, and the Packers have a coach now. The Chargers staff's interesting, right? Like, I've known Ken Whisenhunt for 25 years. Jenny, you've covered the league forever now, and you've gotten around the league. There's no guy like Gus Bradley. He might be one of the most popular guys, not just amongst the media, but amongst his peers, I think. And I remember being down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile the year that he and Whisenhunt were coaching against each other as head coaches, as the Titans and the Jaguars at that point running Senior Bowl practices with Phil Savage. Now they're on the same staff. There really is something interesting about these coaches as they get smarter and coordinators as they get smarter, because this Lamar Jackson thing is certainly gimmicky to some degree, and we talk about the longevity of it and how long your quarterback at that size can see contact 12 to 15 times a game. The thing that blew me away was that he got sacked and got sacked a lot, because I think on the face of it, if you just profile who Lamar Jackson is and the way he throws the ball and the speed and all of that, the one thing you would say about him, sure, he'll fumble, he's not going to be real accurate, he's going to run, there's going to be weeks you can't stop him, you can't catch him, but the one thing you'd say is you're probably going to have a hard time sacking him, right? And the fact that he was sacked like that was an amazing thing about cutting off those channels you talk about, because sacking him might be the hardest thing to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, they said, when they thought it was a passing situation, they were going to get pressure and they were going to sort of stunt guys into places that they thought might be his escape routes. And they really did that. I mean, they had some different approaches up front. I mean, if they thought it was an inside draw, they put defensive linemen over the center and two guards to sort of clog up the middle. And when they thought it was a passing play, they had a lot of defensive line games to sort of move guys around, go into the places where they thought Jackson might try to escape and get him that way. And you saw that it worked. I mean, really, Melvin Ingram had a fantastic game, and they also have Joey Bosa up front. So I think they knew they had the talent up front that, even if we only have 4 defensive linemen and we have all these defensive backs behind them, we still can have a strong presence up front because we trust those guys and the talent up there. I think the other thing that was, we're talking about coaching, and Anthony Lynn said to me after the game, like, we had this game plan, but if it didn't work, we were prepared to scrap it. So that, that meaning if this idea of going light with 7 defensive backs didn't work against a team that runs the ball, because it sort of seems counterintuitive, right? Like, you've got all these light guys on the field. Can they really stop the run? If it didn't work, they were prepared to scrap it and go back to a more traditional lineup. And I think that idea of in-game adjustments is really important. And I think that's where Anthony Lynn really thrives as a coach. I covered him since he's a position coach with the Jets and has worked his way up through the coaching ladder.
I think of him as a Rex guy, right? Like, if you're talking Tree, right?
Well, Rex, but also Parcells. I think he was really influenced by both of them. Actually he got his start in coaching. Bill Walsh sort of was the first one to suggest that he might go into coaching. He's also coached under Shanahan. So he's got all of these different influences. But I think really the thing that shapes him is the fact that he was once a player and he's got this great feel for the flow of the game. So he has these 2 coordinators who are head coaches that he really trusts, but he knows sort of what right notes to strike in different moments. And it reminds me a little bit of Doug Peterson last year. And I know that Anthony Lynn has studied Doug Peterson and sort of when he was aggressive and when he decided to go for two. And, the Chargers obviously went for two against the Chiefs during the regular season to win that game, which sort of stunned people because, usually you take the extra point and go for overtime. And he said, no, we're going to go for two and win it right now. And I felt like that same feel for the game helped him in the Ravens game, right? If their defensive game plan wasn't working, he had the confidence to say, we can adjust midstream. And I think that's the mark of a smart head coach.
She is Jenny Vrentas. She covers all things NFL for the MMQB and Sports Illustrated. She was in Baltimore working the Chargers locker room to get all the facts straight and wrote a great piece out at the MMQB that we shared on Monday in the aftermath. I thought it'd be good to get her on, and I figure as long as we're not talking about Penn State or Maryland, I'm happy with you, Jenny, so all is well. For the Ravens, and I had, every week I have someone like you on or several people like you on, my friends who sort of do fly-ins or doing a piece on Lamar or Joe or Harbaugh or whatever the story is. And last week it was Randy Moss, and I said to him, you did a fly-in here thinking the Ravens might lose to the Browns and you'd be covering the aftermath of where is John Harbaugh headed. The John Harbaugh story and the Joe Flacco story and Ozzie Newsome, which we've known that for a year now, that he would be exiting, a pretty monumental, sort of a weird weekend to be around Baltimore on the fly-in, as you and Peter King and many others were, for a playoff game that not only did they lose, they got their feelings hurt, and some weirdness in the aftermath of all of it as to where they're going with all of this, because I think there are plenty of head coaches that would look at this and say, if you give me Lamar Jackson, you're not really giving me a franchise quarterback. You're giving me a party trick for the next year or two.
It is an interesting time in Baltimore just because there's a lot of transition that's taking place. As you mentioned, Ozzie is retiring and, they're switching to Eric DaCosta and, Harbaugh's future. Obviously the team put out a statement a couple weeks ago, but he hadn't yet, inked that extension. So there certainly have been people around the league keeping an eye on that situation because were that not to come to fruition, Harbaugh would certainly be, at the top of most teams' lists. And then, you have this situation where Flacco's time in Baltimore is coming to an end. I was standing by the players' entrances before the game, and we saw Flacco arrive, and, the group of fans waiting for autographs was erupting in cheers and screaming, Joe, Joe. And then at the end, someone started chanting MVP, and they said, we still love you, Joe. And so obviously the city has that connection with him just because he brought them that Super Bowl win. But it's clear that, Lamar Jackson is the future and the Ravens will make a move and Flacco will look to continue elsewhere. Yes, on the one hand, it's like there's all this time of transition, and then on the other hand, you've got this quarterback in place, and, so it's interesting, right? Because not every team in the 2018 draft felt the same way about every quarterback. But obviously the Ravens felt that Lamar Jackson was a dynamic player and someone who could grow. I mean, what a quarterback is his rookie season is not what he is for the rest of his career. And I think the Ravens did a really good job of transitioning midseason, making that big change from Flacco to Jackson and changing the offensive identity. But I think it's crazy to think that Jackson isn't going to grow, right? So, things this season, you basically give the rookie quarterback, and this is true with a lot of rookie quarterbacks, you make the offense around things that they're most comfortable with that will work when they're on the field right away, and then you build on that in the future. And I think Jackson's a dynamic player. He's a smart kid. He is a humble kid. His teammates really seem to respond to him from everything I could tell, and especially the way that on Monday they were defending him and mad at the fans that booed and wanted Flacco to come into the game. Several players are pointing out the way he rallied the team back, and I think that excitement is what you have with Jackson. So, at this point, it makes the most sense for, Harbaugh and Jackson to continue their partnership moving forward. But there has been certainly uncertainty at all of the biggest positions on the team, right? GM, head coach, quarterback. There's either uncertainty or change. And so it really is kind of an unusual time in Baltimore.
Well, you write stories for a living, and we always say we root for the best story. Wow. I mean, I've sat here every day and watched the twists and the turns of a 4-5 team with an injured Super Bowl quarterback that they were looking to jettison and try the other guy and then catch lightning in a bottle and go win a game out in Los Angeles in a soccer rink to force a home playoff game. I mean, it's a pretty juicy year, but the way it ended should not be shocking, right? I don't know what else to say when you're out running around with a rookie quarterback that mistakes are made. And to your point, can he get better? Can he throw the ball better? Can he become, I don't want to say a pocket quarterback, but at some point they all need to become that. We've never seen it done the other way with any certainty for any long stretch of time. And I was in Atlanta the night that Adelis Thomas broke Michael Vick in half in a meaningless preseason game, which we wouldn't see any of that anymore because they wouldn't put these guys in those situations. But all of that is to be determined. But I think for the organization here, Yanda, Suggs, Weddle, a lot of veteran, a lot of long in the tooth, a lot of guys that have been here a long time with Harbaugh. And then there's the value of Joe Flacco out in the marketplace. Going to be fascinating to see who wants him and how much they're willing to put into that, because the Ravens are going to get a draft pick or two out of that, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, the contract is very tradable. Obviously it was a blockbuster deal when it was signed, but of course the price has gone up. The contract's tradable. I don't have a good feel at this point. I don't know what teams would be willing to part with. Obviously there are a decent amount of teams with a question at quarterback, and where Joe Flacco could make sense. And of course he still wants to play, right? I mean, that much is clear. He was a great teammate, and I think both him and Harbaugh deserve a lot of credit for, I think, sort of how easy and smooth the transition was, because I don't think that it would always be that way. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Flacco's future will be very interesting. And I do think NFL offenses today look a lot different, right? I mean, I think teams are more open to mixing in college principles. But yeah, the biggest question right now is, what is the long-term prognosis of these college principles, of this new mold of quarterback? Is the traditional mold of quarterback still the one that everyone wants and that's still the most long-term viable? But I think when you watch Lamar Jackson on the field, you see the excitement that he brings. And I think it's hard not to see the way he conducts himself and see a true professional that's, going to improve and going to grow with the teammates. And yeah, I think that, the offensive staff, some of Sunday's game falls on them too, right? Not recognizing the tendencies. I mean, if you have an opposing defense saying, as one of the Chargers defensive tackles said to me, that they knew what was coming 60 to 70% of the plays, that's not all on Jackson. That's a lot on the coaches, not recognizing that things were becoming predictable and that there were tendencies that teams who hadn't seen the team twice hadn't picked up on, but the Chargers were able to. So I think that's something too, is, you can build an offense and mix in all these principles, but the most important thing that any defense, regardless of what style you're running, is they're going to dissect your film looking for tells. And I think the Ravens offense, had too many tells, and maybe that's to be expected. You're implementing it mid-season. You're trying to keep things, learnable for everyone on offense and manageable, but that's definitely something they'll have to work on in the offseason.
Jenny Vrentas can be read at the MMQB. She is headed off to Foxborough. I was hoping to hear the foghorn up there and see Tommy run out and see all the muskets and whatnot. But here we go. I mean, we're down to 8 teams. This is your time of the year when you guys shine so much at the MMQB and all that you're doing. I'll be in Atlanta in a couple weeks, as will you. A little crystal balling here. Some interesting football games this week, and I think it's very hard to not like the Colts and the way they're playing right now. And we talk about special quarterbacks and what Baker Mayfield might be and what Joe Flacco wasn't. Boy, Andrew Luck has just come back in and, put the cape on and looks like a 1-1, looks like a Hall of Fame talent, and looks like the kind of leadership, and maybe Frank Reich's just what the doctor ordered there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I voted Andrew Luck Comeback Player of the Year for the AP ballot just because it's, we didn't know, right? We were talking about, could this guy throw? Even as late as September, there was a question, oh my gosh, he didn't throw the Hail Mary. Does that mean his shoulder's not okay? And, just to see where they are now and the total transformation that team has made. from the way they started this year to where they are now. And I think there's Frank Reich, like we're talking about Anthony Lynn, another former player who just really has a feel for the game and doesn't flinch in certain situations. I think that's something that they both have, and a flexibility to respond to where their team is and sort of know what buttons to push with the team. I think that's something the two coaches share. I picked at the start of the playoffs, I picked the Saints-Chiefs Super Bowl. At the start of the season, I picked the Patriots-Saints Super Bowl. The reality is this year is one of the most wide open in recent years that I can remember. And perhaps part of that is because the Patriots aren't this, dominant team. They're not as dominant as we've seen in recent years. Maybe that's part of it. But it just feels like there's some, there's these wild card teams that are surging and up and comers like the Colts and the Chargers and, the Eagles on the NFC side. And so, I went into that last weekend thinking one thing would happen. And, now the Eagles are headed to New Orleans. And so, I think it's really hard. I think there's a lot of young players, a lot of young teams, a lot of young coaches. There's obviously some of the stalwarts still in the playoffs, so we have a lot of fresh faces. So I think it's a really interesting playoff bracket. And while this past weekend's games might not have been exactly as exciting as we thought, they certainly weren't the scoring bonanzas of the playoffs that everyone thought we would be seeing. If you asked us all in mid-October. Clearly defense still matters. I had picked Saints over Chiefs a couple weeks ago, but I don't know that I feel great about that right now.
Well, I feel good about all the quarterbacks, right? So at this point, if chalk holds and all the home teams win, you'll have Mahomes and Brady, right, in Kansas City, and you'll have Goff and Breeze in New Orleans. That's what the champion. And if that doesn't work out, maybe you substitute in a Luck for a Mahomes, so you'd have Luck and Brady, or you'd have Rivers and Luck, or Rivers and Mahomes. I mean, we're talking about that kind of a matchup. And I think for Rivers, who hasn't been there yet, for Luck, who hasn't been there yet, this gets interesting. And I think it's interesting for Foles as well, and for where Philadelphia is in trying to climb the mountain and slay the giant again. So there's plenty of intrigue here, and I think the end for Belichick and Brady being near, and I wonder also where the end is for Jason Garrett and, for the Dallas Cowboys, because for a lot of these coaches, Garrett, Harbaugh, all these guys were thought to be under fire at the same time McCarthy was under fire, right? Back around Halloween. And it's amazing. 8 weeks changes the narrative dramatically when it comes to coaching.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We figured, even if the Cowboys made the playoffs, let's say they have a first-round exit, is Garrett out, and of course that hasn't happened. And Harbaugh and the Ravens turned things around with, putting Lamar Jackson in. Obviously Flacco was injured, but, the point is, these teams sort of did this total 180, and we thought, the Colts, well, they were showing promise, but next year was going to be their year. And now it's like, well, hey, wait a minute. Can the Colts make a run this year? Did anyone think they would be this good this soon? So it really is amazing, just the ability for teams to sort of pivot midseason and, when things are going poorly, to be able to find a fix to that. And that's why Philadelphia is interesting, right? The fix is, again, Nick Foles, and it's just like, I don't know that any of us predicted that Foles would have another magic run like he is, but you can't, it's just remarkable. This guy just has, the team is just so good when he's in there.
Well, then you'd have to ask yourself, do I want Nick Foles or Joe Flacco to be my quarterback next year if they're on the market? And I think that'll be the wacky season when all this is over with. We got 7 football games left. Jenny Vrentas will be covering them all for the MMQB. She's in Foxborough this week, where we wanted to be, and the Chargers will be coming in there, and we will be watching from the golf course or the couch or wherever we are. Always a pleasure to see you. I'm sure we'll circle it in Atlanta, and I'm sure it'll be a great Super Bowl 53. We got Hall of Fame voting. Plenty of things to talk about around here as we turn the corner. Great to have you on, Jenny. Good to see you in Baltimore.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
It always means that the Ravens are doing well when all the national writers come in. So when I see the likes of Jenny Vrentas and Peter King having caffeine in the back of the press box, I say, hey, must be playoff time, Festivus time around here. Ravens lose, Chargers move on. Luke and I are cleaning out the lockers here. We'll get into some baseball, some Terps, and other things. But meanwhile, it's all heads down on the future of the Baltimore Ravens in the aftermath of the loss to the Los Angeles Chargers. I guess I have to start calling them that now that they won. Sort of weird watching the Colts and not hating on them, too. It's a little... I don't know. The only rooting interest I have here, I'm rooting for Jim Schwartz because he's my friend and he runs around with the Eagles and a few other handfuls of guys I see running around. But, I always feel good when Andy Reid wins. I like Andy Reid, so I'm not going to hate on the Chiefs. So let the Chiefs fans be happy, Let a new fan, let the Rams win or something. Let new teams win because it feels good to win and it sucks to lose. I know because we're here right now. The BuyAToyota.com audio vault is there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper delivers to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. That is all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's always $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Just 5 down. It's 2019. We're not even 2 weeks into the new year. Start it off right. Get the Planet Fitness. Also, Laurel Park. They're running down there, and the entries on the front of WNST.net, as well as in our morning newspaper, shipped every morning to your email inbox. If there's any breaking news, anything weird going on with the Ravens or the Orioles, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home, getting you ready for playoff football that we're no longer a part of. It is the SSV on WNST, heard from 3 until 5 on Thursday. I am Nestor, nasty at WNST.net is my email. I am a very available individual. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube, WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.